42% of New Zealand businesses that got a ransom demand this year paid it. Negotiated. Paid. That's not the number that should keep your board awake at night. Invisible risk is already inside your organization. 43% of New Zealand leaders say their biggest cyber risk isn't ransomware or nation-state attackers. It's the colleague in the next office copying patient records or client data into an AI tool no one ever approved. Breach required. For attacker needed. Access controls show nothing unusual. Data has left the building. On the 1st of May, New Zealand's Information Privacy Principle 3A takes effect. Every organization that can't demonstrate it governed this risk is starting from a compliance deficit, not after.
Let's get into it.
Welcome to the Hamberger Report. This is part 9 of a 10-part series on cyber resilience governance for New Zealand boards and executives. The two statistics in that opening define what this episode addresses. The first, 42% of organizations paying ransoms, is the consequence of reaching a crisis without a playbook. The second, shadow AI as the leading threat vector, is the risk most organizations have not yet added to the playbook they do not have. 3 accountability deadlines converge this month. The Office of the Privacy Commissioner concludes Phase 1 of its ManageMyHealth inquiry, setting the regulatory standard of care for health sector cybersecurity governance. The Ministry of Health independent review reaches its reporting deadline on the same date, and the mandatory cybersecurity standards first reporting window for mandated entities closes. 1 day later, Information Privacy Principle 3A enforcement begins, bringing a new indirect collection obligation to every New Zealand organization that handles personal information. Part 8 mapped those regulatory obligations. This episode maps the practical toolkit. The standard New Zealand incident response architecture rests on 3 assumptions. Access is granted through verified credentials. Threats come from outside the perimeter. Anomalies are detected by volume, signature, or known bad indicators. The ManageMyHealth breach tested all 3 and found them insufficient. The attacker used valid credentials, obtained through a third-party portal with inadequate access controls. The entry point was a supplier integration, not a perimeter breach. The anomaly. Hundreds of thousands of document accesses against a patient's expected 3 to 4 per month went undetected because no behavioral baseline existed to detect it against. The Audit of Intent framework asks a different question. Not, does this credential have permission? The better question is, does this behavior match the pattern of legitimate use? An organization that can answer the second question is materially better positioned under both the mandatory cybersecurity standard and the OPC's reasonable steps test. Shadow AI creates a structurally identical detection problem. An employee with valid credentials copies patient or client records into an unsanctioned AI tool. From the access control layer, nothing anomalous happened. The credential was right, the resource was permitted, the action completed. The data has now left the organization, transmitted to a third-party system with unknown retention and privacy practices. Your response framework has no record it occurred. The detection architecture is the same. The governance gap is the same. The 4 tools ManageMyHealth lacked are not exotic or expensive. They are foundational. Multi-factor authentication was available on the MMH platform, but was not mandatory for the affected module at the time of the breach. Mandatory 2-step verification was introduced on 23 March 2026, 3 months after the breach. Industry commentary confirmed vulnerabilities of this kind were long-standing, and remediation had been deferred. The cost of that deferral has materially exceeded what prevention would have required. Behavioral analytics would have detected the breach in its first hours. Hundreds of thousands of document accesses against an expected baseline of 3 to 4 monthly accesses per patient. No automated detection or lockout occurred. An audit of intent architecture would have flagged the anomaly within hours. A board-level incident response framework was absent. The Institute of Directors analysis from February 2026 confirmed that ManageMyHealth had no functioning board at the time of the breach. Authority to invoke response protocols was unassigned. Communication chain to directors was absent. This is not a technology gap. It is a governance gap. And shadow AI governance posture. ManageMyHealth's public communications do not document a shadow AI governance framework. For any organization managing personal health information after the 1st of May, that absence is a compliance exposure, regardless of whether a breach occurs. Information Privacy Principle 3. A takes effect on the 1st of May 2026. It applies to personal information collected indirectly, including from third parties, on or after that date. Organizations must proactively and specifically notify individuals when their personal information has been collected from third parties. A generic clause in a privacy policy is, per OPC published guidance, insufficient. The shadow AI scenario creates a specific IPP3A exposure when an employee copies patient or client records into an unsanctioned AI tool. The organization may be deemed to have collected that information via a third-party system, one with no contractual data processing controls, and no visibility into retention or onward disclosure practices. I want to be precise about the epistemic status of this connection. It is an analytical synthesis from confirmed premises, not a statement the OPC has made. The individual elements are all confirmed. IPP3A scope, shadow AI as a data exfiltration vector, and a reasonable step standard as an objective test. The connection is a logical inference. No published OPC guidance specifically addresses shadow AI as an indirect collection vector under IPP3A. Organizations preparing for enforcement are doing so against a framework not yet tested against this specific scenario. That is not a reason to wait. It is a reason to move first. The Australian Privacy Act precedent is instructive. The MedLab judgment from October 2025 imposed an AUD 5.8 million penalty and found that reasonable steps is an objective test. Vendor reliance does not discharge duty. The absence of a governance framework is itself the failure. Trend Micro's April 2026 study of 3,700 business and IT leaders across 23 countries found that 67% have felt pressure to approve AI tools despite security concerns, with nearly 1 in 5 describing those concerns as extreme but overridden by competitive pressure. 68% say AI is advancing more quickly than they can secure it. The shadow AI problem is a global governance gap that New Zealand's enforcement framework is about to make legally material. The Kordia 2026 data on ransom response deserves careful reading by every board. 42% of NZ organizations that received a ransom demand paid it. 8% of all organizations surveyed paid a ransom in the past 12 months. 32% say they would consider paying if faced with one. Financial extortion affected 19% of organizations impacted by a cyber incident, up from 14% in 2024. The governance problem these numbers represent is not the payment decision itself. It is that the decision was made under crisis conditions, without a pre-authorized framework, by people who had not thought through it before they were forced to make it. The Hour Zero protocol, which we introduced in part 6 of this series, addresses this directly. A board that has pre-decided the ransom question, with legal counsel, cyber insurers, and law enforcement implications considered in advance, removes that decision from the in-crisis moment. The question of whether to pay becomes a matter of documented policy rather than a choice made under duress in the first 12 hours of a ransomware event. The same principle applies to AI-generated threats. AI-generated phishing now accounts for 80% of phishing attacks in New Zealand, with a 54% click-through rate against 12% for traditional phishing. Signature-based detection tools most NZ organizations rely on were not built for content that is grammatically correct, contextually plausible, and individually tailored. The detection gap is not a failure of your controls. It is a consequence of the threat environment changing faster than the controls can follow. 4 questions. Every board should be able to answer them. 1. Can you detect anomalous behavior, not just unauthorized access? MFA stops credential-only attacks. Behavioral analytics detects the attack that gets through. An organization that can answer yes to both has a materially stronger position than one that can answer only the first. 2. Do you have a documented board-approved AI acceptable use policy? Not an IT department guidance note. A policy adopted at board level that names unsanctioned AI tools as a data handling risk and sets the standard for what employees may and may not do with personal information in AI tools, including senior leadership. Without this, your organization is accumulating governance debt that will become a compliance exposure from the 1st of May. 3. Has the board pre-decided the ransom question? The decision framework should address notification thresholds, law enforcement engagement protocols, cyber insurance conditions, and your organization's documented position on payment. The decision made under pressure in the first 12 hours will be the decision you have to justify later. Add it to your next meeting agenda if you have not. 4. Do you know what AI tools your employees are using right now? Not what is on the approved list. What is actually being used, on what devices, with what data, under what terms? If the answer is that you do not know, that is the governance gap. The starting point is a shadow AI audit, a structured inventory of AI tool use across the organization, with the results briefed to the board. The response tools this episode has mapped: behavioral analytics, board-level incident response frameworks, pre-authorized ransom decision frameworks, shadow AI acceptable use policies, are not years-long infrastructure projects. They are governance decisions a board can make and begin acting on this week. The audit of intent framing is worth keeping. The OPC is not asking whether ManageMyHealth had the right technology. It is asking whether ManageMyHealth had the right intent, governance structures, and processes to protect the information in its care. That is the same question every New Zealand board should be asking itself. Not whether your perimeter controls hold, whether your governance decisions reflect the intent of an organization that takes data stewardship seriously. The architectural debt framework applies directly here. The debt accrued before the 1st of May does not retrospectively attract IPP 3A penalties. But the practices that created that debt do not disappear. The OPC's reasonable steps, standard under IPP 5, has no such date boundary. The practices in place before the 1st of May are the practices that will be examined if a breach occurs after it. Part 10, the series capstone, addresses what comes after the accountability window closes: the legacy of stewardship, the architectural debt audit, and the resilience manifesto that translates this series frameworks into a board commitment for the next decade. If you have done the work, Part 10 shows you how to demonstrate it. If you have not, Part 10 shows you where to start. What governance decision is your board most unprepared to make in a crisis? Is it the ransom question, the shadow AI audit, or something else entirely?
That is the Hamberger report for today. If this was useful, subscribe and hit the like button. It helps more professionals find the channel. You will find links to everything we covered in the description below. I am Andreas Hamberger, and I will see you tomorrow.
Like and subscribe.